Welcome to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave, and today I'm joined by The Hill's White House columnist, Niall Stanage. Always nice to see you, Niall.
Good to be with you, Robby. Always enjoy a bit of Free Media. How are you?
I am doing just fine. So nice to be introduced to your mother, who is visiting.
Absolutely. But we got her out of the room because we thought you might feel bad if you were arguing with me in front of her. She might be defending me too much.
Yes.
In.
I would pull my punches when there's a family member in the room. We can't have that. I was taping with Andrew Heaton last week, who works here at Reason, and he had his dog free roaming the area, which was just a tremendous distraction, even though I wanted to take something out of him.
The dog was softening your edges there.
Very much so.
Excellent. Well, let's get to it, because Pete Buttigieg sat for a wide-ranging interview with independent journalist Andrew Callaghan. Callahan admitted on social media that he was reluctant to publish the interview, however, because of the backlash from his fans. According to them, he didn't grill Buttigieg hard enough on Israel and Gaza. Here was the relevant part of the interview.
There is nothing intrinsically anti-Semitic about speaking up for the rights of Palestinians. At the same time, a lot of people I know who lie awake at night worried about their kids going to college or walking the streets, hear expressions of support for Palestinian civilian life and think about the fact that even though nothing about that makes you soft on anti-Semitism, the experience has been that those two things, expressions of support for Palestinian civilian life and expressions of anti-Semitism, have sometimes traveled together, because there is, in fact, an explosion of anti-Semitism going on in this country.
The perspective of our generation is it's really a matter of scale and mobility. Because obviously it's not good for someone to be targeted in an anti-Semitic tirade on a college campus. But you look at, 65,000 plus civilians killed in Gaza, and then you think about somebody getting harassed on a college campus, and it just doesn't seem like a fair shake to balance one and say, someone's at Harvard, and there's protesters who are hurting someone's feelings, versus people who can't leave, stuck in an open air prison, haven't been able to leave since 2005. They're getting shot indiscriminately in aid lines. They want sovereignty.
So this is really interesting, because he did get backlash for this, or at least he thought he got backlash for it. I think part of it was posted on his Patreon first, and then he posted on social media very honestly that he didn't know if he was going to release the interview to a wider range of people because of the negative feedback he got for supposedly not pushing hard enough on Israel, and I guess asking about AIPAC specifically. I didn't watch the entire interview. I watched the Israel relevant part of it, and I actually thought he did raise some, him being Andrew Callaghan, raise some perfectly polite but civil and interesting rebuttals or different perspectives to what Buttigieg was saying about anti-Semitism and Israel. So I guess he didn't ask about AIPAC specifically, but isn't that more of a question for members of Congress anyway? The kind of idea that they're each being handled by someone in AIPAC. It's not, Buttigieg was in the cabinet, so I was a little confused.
Yeah, I broadly agree with that. I think there's obviously two separate issues. There's Callahan's performance as an interviewer and Pete Buttigieg's performance as the interviewee. Now, in Callahan's case, yes, admittedly, he wasn't screaming and wagging his finger at Buttigieg, but that's not the only way you can get a revealing interview. And I think the part of the exchange that we just played certainly wasn't a softball. It was in a civil way, making a very valid point to my mind, which is that, yes, of course, anti-Semitism is a bad thing. Of course, anti-Semitic incidents are abhorrent and should be treated as such. Is that the same as 60,000 or more than 60,000 people getting killed in this ongoing military assault? No, those two things obviously are not the same thing. And it seemed to me that Callahan made that point well, and Buttigieg didn't really address it. I didn't think terribly effectively. My perspective on Buttigieg is he is a good communicator if you define communication as simply articulating yourself in a fluent way. But what does he actually believe? Like, that's always the problem with Pete Buttigieg. And I think what he got into difficulties here with was sort of this, well, anti-Semitism is bad and we have to remember that even as we criticize Israel's assault on Palestine. Well, okay, but then he talks about that the two things sometimes march hand in hand, which seems to be kind of invalidating criticism of Israel or kind of weaponizing the charge of anti-Semitism. And that's where I get into problems.
He's very conventional, very normie in his kind of, to the extent he has a philosophy, which is not something I'm against necessarily when it comes to Democrats, because I want them to have more moderate policies on a lot of issues. This is the one topic that, in my view, benefits from unconventional thinking on both the right and the left, as criticism and opposition continues to mount to what Israel is doing and our support for it, particularly on the right and also on the left. There's a dissatisfaction with that kind of pat answer that does get to, and then I do feel like it's reminiscent of a safe space mentality when they go on, parents lying awake at night thinking about the danger to their students. I mean, let's put this in a little bit of perspective. I too think it's gross, a lot of the slogans associated with the pro-Palestinian cause on campuses. I've said so. Far too much condoning of actual violence. Any obstructing of people trying to get to their classes should be shut down by the universities. But let's not make it sound like the campuses are killing fields for Jewish students or for anyone else. Right. That was a notion I pushed back in the 2010s when it was kind of a more lefty or progressive, how unsafe it is for black people or trans people, whatever. Like, well, look, it's statistically not really. This is kind of a lot of concern about bad words. That seems to apply pretty aptly to this situation.
Sure. And on the free speech element of this, I mean, I have a very high tolerance for even slogans that are militant slogans, so long as they aren't targeting people on the basis of being Jews. If you have Globalize the Intifada is a classic example of one that I don't use it, but I don't condemn it. I don't think it's necessarily anti-Semitic or outside of the bounds of legitimate debate. But that has become one of these things that people have a whole discussion or exchange about. It just seems to me that Buttigieg, in that conventionality that you're talking about, ended up saying nothing very much, or to the extent that he was saying anything was sort of suggesting that people should curb their criticisms of Israel, which obviously I don't agree with. And, there we are.
And if he wants to turn the conversation back to, on some level, well, let's, talk about what's happening on college campuses. Let's talk about U.S. internal politics. Like, okay, then why do you support, I think he supports, the funding of, the military operation in Gaza vis-a-vis funding to Israel? If you want to turn it to us, then you should disavow that stance or that policy, a policy that is very unpopular, that the right is calling on Republicans to disavow, and that, of course, the left and progressives and just many members of the Democratic base want the party to disavow. This is becoming a big issue. If you paying attention as I do, and I know that you do, to, for instance, right-wing influencer type people. Megyn Kelly has been on a tear this week, increasingly vocal on this, saying that she's facing pressure to disassociate herself from Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, who are also both very vocal on this issue. I have less positive things to say about Candace Owens in particular, but it's interesting what gets you in troubled territory with the more conventional thought leaders in a conservative tradition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a really important point about the overall situation that we find ourselves in, almost exactly 2 years on from October 7th. Because, Netanyahu was at the White House this week. I happened to be at that news conference, though, of course, no questions were taken. But he portrays
Tim Pool got too many questions. You didn't get your chance.
What can we do? I mean,
you're not a MAGA influencer.
Don't get me started. Maybe if I wore a beanie, it would all have worked better.
If you were a beautiful, buxom, blonde woman, you'd get your question in, Niall.
Alas, Robby, I don't think that's going to ever happen. But just on the Netanyahu point, I mean, he considers what Israel has done over the past 2 years to be a victory of sorts. And is it? I mean, Israel is enormously internationally isolated. His own speech to the UN, people walked out of. There's arrest warrants out for him for war crimes from the ICC. But to your point, there has also been an enormous disintegration of what had once been quite firm American support for Israel, particularly among younger people and including people on the right. And you mentioned some of those influencers there who I think are not only influential, but are microcosms of a bigger shift that is going on.
Yeah, I think it's past a certain tipping point among exactly the demographics you're describing, and there really should be some change in policy, at least on the part of our government, or I think there are going to start being, maybe not massive, but electoral consequences that you can weigh in the same way that Kamala Harris obviously paid a penalty for the Biden administration's policies in, for instance, getting the electoral votes of the state of Michigan.
Sure. And just briefly, Robby, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the first elected Republican or congressional Republican to describe what is happening in Gaza as a genocide, does not, to my mind, appear to have suffered any political consequences for that at all, which is interesting in itself.
Very interesting. All right, we'll have more free media right after this.